Introduction. Welcome. Allow yourself to rest, to breathe slowly, and to drift as we begin tonight's quiet journey into the past. Tonight, we will step aboard a medieval ship, not the graceful vessels of storybook adventure, but the cramped, weary, and often miserable world of ordinary sailors. In our imagination, ships of the Middle Ages often conjure images of bold explorers and treasure-laden voyages. Yet for the men who lived upon them, daily existence was rarely glorious. Theirs was a life bound by the rhythm of waves, the endless creak of timbers, and the constant uncertainty of what the sea would give or take away. Over the course of this story, we will move slowly through 4 chapters. First, we will immerse ourselves in the routines of a sailor at sea, the rations, the sickness, and the crowded quarters. Then, we will follow one of history's great navigators, Vasco da Gama, on his voyages to faraway lands. From there, we will drift into the mysteries of shipwrecks uncovered by archaeology, silent vessels resting beneath the waves. And finally, we will step into the lives of captains and merchants, whose wealth and command contrasted sharply with the hardship of those below deck. So close your eyes if you wish. Imagine the sound of waves rolling against wooden planks, the snap of canvas sails above, and the salt-heavy air filling your lungs. You are aboard a medieval ship where life is ruled by the sea and the horizon stretches endlessly in all directions. Segment 1, long voyages with salted rations and sickness. Imagine waking to the gentle sway of a ship upon the water. The air is damp and heavy, thick with the scent of salt, tar, and unwashed bodies. The space around you is narrow. Hammocks or rough mats crowd the deck below, where men sleep side by side with little room to move. Above, the timbers creak as the ship groans under the pull of the wind and waves. The day begins, not with comfort, but with duty. Bells or calls from the watch mark the changing hours. Each sailor knows his place, hauling ropes, trimming sails, scraping decks and climbing rigging that sways high above the sea. The work is relentless, for the ship is never still. Wind and current demand constant adjustments. Meals are meager. Salted fish or beef, stored for weeks in barrels, is tough and briny, often spoiled by time. Ship's biscuit, a dense bread baked until nearly stone-hard, makes up much of the diet. It is dry, tasteless, and sometimes crawling with small insects that thrive in the warmth of the hold. Water, stored in wooden casks, turns stale after only a short time. Often ale or weak wine is rationed instead, not for enjoyment, but because it was safer to drink. Hunger is not the worst enemy, though. Sickness haunts the ship. Scurvy, born of a lack of fresh fruits and vegetables, creeps slowly into the bodies of sailors. Gums swell and bleed, teeth loosen, and strength drains away. Fever, dysentery, and infections spread quickly in the close quarters. The ship's surgeon, if there was one, had few remedies, and the sea offered no escape from disease. Storms bring their own misery. Imagine the sudden roar of wind, the sails straining, the deck tilting sharply as waves crash over the sides. Rain lashes against your face, and every hand is needed to keep the vessel from breaking apart. The fear of being swept overboard is constant, for the sea does not return what it claims. Even in calmer weather, monotony weighs heavily. The horizon is unchanging, the days marked only by the sun and stars, the endless sound of water against wood. Time stretches each day much like the one before, until weeks blur together. And yet, among the hardship there is fellowship. Sailors sang to keep rhythm as they worked, their voices rising together above the sea. They shared stories of distant lands, of storms survived, of treasures seen or imagined. At night, when duties were done, they might gather to pass the time, the flicker of lantern light casting shadows across tired faces. But always, the sea remained the master. It offered little comfort and no guarantees. For the medieval sailor, life was a test of endurance, of body, of spirit, and of patience. Each day was bound to the ship, the crew, and the vast indifferent waters that surrounded them. As night falls, you lie again in your narrow space below deck, listening to the ship's timbers groan, the water lapping outside, and the muffled coughs of your companions in the darkness. The rhythm of the voyage continues, steady and unchanging, carrying you ever onward across the endless sea. Segment 2. Vasco da Gama's Expeditions. From the quiet hardships of ordinary sailors, let us now follow the course of one of the most significant navigators of the late medieval and early modern world, Vasco da Gama. His voyages stretched beyond familiar waters, charting paths that reshaped trade and connected distant continents. Yet even his journeys were shadowed by the same discomforts, dangers, and uncertainties we have already felt aboard a ship. Vasco da Gama was born in Portugal around the year 1460, in a society eager to explore. By this time, European kingdoms were pressing outward along the seas, seeking new trade routes, new sources of wealth, and new connections to distant lands. For centuries, spices from the east, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, had been carried by caravan and ship across long, winding routes that passed through many hands. Each hand took its share, each exchange added to the cost. Portugal dreamed of a direct sea route to India, bypassing these middlemen. In 1497, da Gama was chosen to attempt this voyage. He and his crew set out with 4 ships, leaving the mouth of the Tagus River and slipping into the open Atlantic. Imagine those decks crowded with sailors, provisions, and hopes that the sea itself might open a new path. The voyage was not only a journey of trade, but a leap into the unknown. The fleet sailed down the coast of Africa, stopping at harbors where they could resupply with food and water. They crossed treacherous waters near the Cape of Good Hope, where violent storms threatened to tear ships apart. For days, the men clung to ropes and prayed as the vessels pitched and rolled in the roaring surf. When the winds calmed, the voyage pressed onward, the horizon stretching always ahead. At last, after months of travel, they reached the Indian Ocean, and by the spring of 1498, they anchored near the coast of Calicut in India. The sight of bustling markets, filled with goods from across Asia, must have seemed like the fulfillment of a dream. Yet the reception was not as welcoming as they had hoped. Local rulers and merchants, already part of a thriving trade network, viewed these strangers with suspicion. Even so, da Gama managed to secure small amounts of spices before returning home. The voyage was long and brutal. Scurvy ravaged the crew, and many never saw Portugal again. Of the original company, only a fraction survived the return. But when Vasco da Gama entered Lisbon's harbour in 1499, his ships carried enough proof, pepper, cinnamon, and other precious goods, to show that a sea route to India was indeed possible. This journey, though filled with hardship, changed the course of history. It opened the way for Portugal to build a powerful trading empire, linking Europe with Asia by sea. Vasco da Gama would sail again, later leading more expeditions and cementing his reputation. His name became tied to the age of exploration, a symbol of endurance and ambition across oceans. Yet, for the sailors who accompanied him, the glory was distant. For them, the voyage meant months of salted rations, storms, sickness, and the constant threat of death at sea. The spices they carried home enriched kings and merchants, but the men themselves returned worn, scarred, or sometimes not at all. When we think of Vasco da Gama now, imagine both perspectives: the admiral charting routes that shaped empires, and the ordinary sailor gripping a rope in the salt spray, stomach empty, body weakened by scurvy. Together they made the voyage, and together they remind us that exploration was not only discovery, but endurance. As the sails filled with wind and Lisbon came once more into sight, the weary sailors must have felt both relief and disbelief that the endless ocean had at last released them. Segment 3. Shipwreck Archaeology. From the crowded decks of Vasco da Gama's ships, let us sink now into quieter places, the remains of vessels that never returned. Beneath the surface of seas and rivers lie the silent testimonies of sailors whose journeys ended abruptly. Shipwrecks are more than tragedies. They are time capsules, preserving fragments of life at sea long after voices and sails have faded. Imagine diving slowly into clear water, the sunlight filtering down in pale beams. On the seabed, a shape emerges, timbers darkened by centuries, broken ribs of a ship that once bore men across great distances. Around it lie scattered relics, pottery, tools, perhaps even coins, all resting quietly in the sand, untouched by human hands until discovered centuries later. One such find was the wreck of the Belitung ship, discovered off the coast of Indonesia. Though not medieval European, it belonged to the 9th century and revealed a cargo of Tang dynasty ceramics, a reminder of how global trade routes reached far earlier than we often imagine. For medieval sailors, such wrecks were constant reminders that the sea was not always generous. Closer to Europe, archaeologists have uncovered medieval cogs, sturdy, single-masted ships used widely for trade in the North and Baltic seas. In riverbeds and coastal shallows, their remnants have been pulled from the mud. Sometimes barrels still hold traces of the goods they once carried: salted fish, wool, wine, or grain. These finds offer us glimpses not only of cargo, but of daily life, the kinds of objects ordinary sailors touched, carried, and relied upon. Perhaps the most famous shipwreck story tied to exploration is the Esmeralda, part of Vasco da Gama's fleet. Lost off the coast of Oman in 1503, it lay hidden until archaeologists uncovered it in the 2010s. Among the remains were navigational instruments, weaponry, and even coins stamped with the Portuguese crown. To touch these objects now is to hold a fragment of lives once lived upon the waves. Each shipwreck tells two stories, one of the voyage cut short and one of survival preserved through time. Some reveal the dangers sailors feared most: storms tearing sails to ribbons, rocks splintering hulls, fires that consumed wooden decks. Others speak of battles at sea, when cannon fire or boarding parties brought chaos to the waves. Yet beneath the water, all that remains is stillness. The noise and terror are gone. What is left is only quiet testimony. Imagine standing in a museum, gazing at a fragment of carved wood, its edges worn smooth by the ocean. Perhaps you see a clay jug once filled with wine, or a shoe, the leather stiff with age. These objects, though simple, connect us across time. They remind us that the sailors who wore, used, and touched them were not so different from ourselves. Men with calloused hands, weary bodies, and hopes carried across the horizon. Shipwreck archaeology brings us closer to the human side of history. It takes what was lost and restores it to memory, offering us glimpses of voyages that never returned to port. In their silence, these wrecks remind us of the fragility of life at sea, the constant uncertainty that hung over every voyage. As you picture these remains, imagine the slow rocking of the waves above, the distant echo of gulls, and the quiet rest of ships that will never sail again. They lie beneath the surface, forgotten by the living, yet still carrying stories that drift gently into our present. Segment 4. Captains and wealthy merchants. While most sailors endured cramped quarters, salted rations, and sickness, there were others aboard ships whose lives followed a different rhythm. The captains and wealthy merchants lived not in hardship, but in relative comfort, and their fates were often tied to the success or failure of voyages. Imagine the captain's cabin, still modest by modern standards, yet far more spacious than the sailors' hammocks below deck. A wooden desk might hold maps, compasses, and ledgers. The air carried the faint scent of wax from a burning candle, the walls decorated with a few simple carvings. Here, decisions were made, courses charted, and records kept. While sailors struggled with ropes and sails, the captain's burden was of responsibility. for lives, for cargo, and for the reputation that followed each voyage. Merchants, too, often traveled on board, guarding their investments. For them, the sea was not simply a workplace, but a path to profit. Spices, silks, wool, and wine were loaded in barrels and sacks, each one representing risk and reward. A storm could destroy fortunes in a single night. A safe return could enrich a family for generations. In ports like Venice, Genoa, Lisbon, and Bruges, wealthy merchants built lives far removed from those of the sailors who carried their goods. Their homes were adorned with tapestries, their tables filled with imported delicacies, their voices carried weight in civic councils. For them, the sea was not endured directly, but was experienced through the hands and hardships of others. Yet even captains and merchants were not immune to the sea's power. Authority did not shield them from storms, nor wealth from the spread of disease on board. Many died alongside their crews, buried together in the same restless waters. Still, the contrast remained clear. Where ordinary sailors counted each meal and ration, captains dined from private stores. Where sailors slept in crowded holds, merchants rested in cabins away from the noise of labor. This division reminds us that even on a single ship, society was layered. The sea carried them all, but not equally. Conclusion. And now, our voyage through the world of medieval sailors comes to an end. We began in the dim, crowded spaces of a ship, where sailors endured long journeys on salted rations, stale water, and the constant threat of sickness. We followed Vasco da Gama across uncharted seas, his voyages reshaping the map of the known world, while sailors bore the silent cost. We drifted downward into the stillness of shipwrecks, their remains preserved as quiet memorials to lives lost. And finally, we stepped into the cabins of captains and merchants, where wealth and authority offered comforts that ordinary sailors could scarcely imagine. Through it all, one theme endures. The sea was both pathway and prison. It offered opportunity and connection, but demanded endless endurance from those who lived upon it. The sailor's life was rarely one of glory. Instead, it was marked by hunger, monotony, storms, and the steady rhythm of work that never truly ended. Now, as you lie in comfort, you may reflect on the contrast. You are not rocked by waves in the dark hold of a ship, nor awakened by the cry of a captain demanding sail be trimmed. You are not bound to salted rations or stale water. You are safe, on land, in a place of stillness. Take a slow breath, as though inhaling the quiet of a calm sea. Imagine the ship's timbers settling into silence, the stars bright above an endless horizon, the ocean rocking gently beneath. Let the hardships of that world drift away, leaving only the rhythm of water, steady and soothing. The sailors are gone, their voices carried into the distance by waves. What remains for you is calm, safety, and rest. Good night.